Tonight by Michael Hall.
And this week I have with me the distinguished violinist and violin teacher, Max Rostal, who earlier this year came back to this country to give a series of masterclasses at the Britten Peer School in Aldeburgh. Max Rostal, during and after the war when you taught at the Guildhall School of Music, many people thought that you were laying the foundations of something that had never happened before in this country, a British school of violin playing. Your pupils included Aoife Niemann, Erich Greenberg, Ellie Goran, and 3 members of the Amadeus Quartet. Do you think a British school has materialized, or are national schools a thing of the past?
That's very difficult to answer. I'm very proud indeed that you mentioned this, and I think I have made a contribution to this country as far as violin and viola playing is concerned.
Indeed, yes.
And of course I'm very happy about it, and that is why I really got and earned my CBE for. So whether that is a continuation, well, in some ways it is, because people you mentioned just now, like Aoife Niemann and Grünberg, they are teaching as well. And of course, Brian Neen from the Amadeus Quartet, and Nissel as well. They're all teaching, and I think that they are more or less continuing on our lines, and well, they will not create any revolutionary idea, but it's quite enough if it's an evolution.
Why didn't the British produce a violin school? Because at the end of the 18th century, we had some marvellous violinists.
I know. But, when I came to this country, there were some excellent violinists, that I must say. Not a violin school, but violinists.
Too individualistic, perhaps?
Well, maybe. I don't know. And then, of course, great executants are not always capable or wanting to give away their secrets. That happens, unfortunately. A very great friend of mine, the great violinist Joseph Szigeti, said to me one day, I lost 7 years in my life because I was teaching during that time. So, you see, that is a viewpoint.
And do these great schools still exist? Can you say that there's still a Franco-Belgian school or a German school of fiddle playing?
Well, not to the same extent as it used to be. Of course, what is interesting is the various schools, like the Russian school and the Hungarian school and the German school and so on, that stems all from Hungary, funnily enough, because the great Russian school was created by the man Leopold Auer, who was the teacher of Heifetz and Ellmann and all this. He was Hungarian by birth. Then my own teacher, Karl Flesch, he was the type of German violinist, but he was Hungarian by birth. And Joseph Joachim, he was Hungarian by birth. So it's very odd.
And yet they produced quite distinctive modes of playing. There's a quite distinctive difference between ours playing, or there must have been.
Yes, that is perfectly true. They created really different schools, and the actual Hungarian school, which was a man called Jenő Hubay, his parents were German.
Now, what was the fundamental difference between these schools in the old days? Was it merely a question of bowing technique, or was it something much more sophisticated than that?
All sorts of things. It was also style of playing. And of course, it had technical reasons and differentiation of technical approach. But I would say that the kind of virtuoso aspects came more through the Russian school than the German school. The German school was more philosophical and classical and thoughtful and very much more responsible in a way, but they were not flashy.
More chamber music players, perhaps?
No, also concerto playing. But what you associate with the name of Joachim, for instance, the sort of classical player who, after all, the Brahms violin concerto was dedicated, and the Bruch violin concerto was dedicated to him. On the other hand, we had, of course, a French school, which is completely different. That was Viotti, and later on people like Thibault NS school, that is more the French school. And my own teacher, Karl Flesch, was in fact a student both of the Viennese school, the Austrian tradition, and also of in France.
So what distinguished the French school then? What was the
That is
qualities
taste.
that they had?
It was rather taste. The question of taste, it's very difficult to define that. There was a certain elegance of it, a certain amount of fragrance about it, and lightness, elegance.
Now, even though the differences between the national schools have diminished over the last few years, certainly recently, about every 30 years or so, there are differences in violin style generally. No one plays like Kreisler nowadays, for example.
No, but that is the taste of the time has changed. You see, you can't do this amount of sliding as they did at that time, which was good taste, certainly good taste, but nowadays not in fashion anymore. So that is different. But I would say that there are a number of violinists who would go into this particular category that a man like Kreisler represented. I myself was very often compared to this kind of playing. You see, I'm by birth an Austrian myself.
He must be the dominant influence when you were a young boy in Vienna.
Indeed, of course he was.
And did you imitate him consciously or not?
No, never. No. If I couldn't identify myself with something, not even with a certain work, I would not play a work of which I am not really aware of what's going on and identifying myself with it. No, I would not do that.
Your first principal teacher was Arnold Rose.
Yes.
He was very distinguished in the Viennese school, was he not?
He was very distinguished indeed. He had, at that time, the world-leading string quartet, the Rose Quartet. He was, by the way, concertmaster of the Vienna Philharmonic and a brother-in-law of Gustav Mahler. And he was a great musical influence on me. He was not a very distinguished teacher.
Why was that?
He wasn't interested.
Playing was his métier.
Yes.
But then, of course, in this country, he came across this country and his quartet in the 30s, didn't he? He was playing in the 30s and 40s until the end of the war.
Oh, yes, but he was an emigrant.
Yes, of course.
And then he tried to build up another quartet, but he was really practically beyond it. He was too old.
Now, when you were 13, I think it was, you went to Flesch in Berlin.
Yes.
Now, Flesch is almost a sort of legend as a teacher. I mean, everyone talks about the greatness of
Yes.
Flesch. But what was so extraordinary about him?
Well, he possibly was the first violinist who put violin playing on a scientific basis. That never happened before. I mean, his book on the art of violin playing, well, is practically a Bible. And that was never, I mean, there were violin schools before, but never on that level.
And yet, though Flesch was an enormous influence and the legend as a teacher, it was ours teaching, both in Moscow and I suppose with the emigres to America in New York, which now dominate the violin playing of our time.
It doesn't.
Doesn't it?
Oh, no. It's most astonishing that there are wonderful, great American violinists, but there are some excellent Korean violinists.
Now, where do they learn, though? They go to New York, don't they?
No. They partly go to America, they partly go to Europe. Actually, there's a bit of a fashion with all these Asian people, and including North American ones, to go to Europe because of the actual tradition and style of German music. After all, you have Bach and Brahms and Mozart and Schubert and all this, the greatest composers, and they want to get the real good style of that sort, which they can't, or they think they can't get it in America.
So they come to Europe. You were extolling the virtues of a Korean violinist you've been teaching at Aldeburgh this summer.
Yes, well, yes.
Saying how extraordinary. It was
Quite,
she or a he?
quite extraordinary.
Yeah.
It's particularly interesting because years back, the world thought, especially of violinists, not cellists, not conductors, not pianists, that this was a Jewish affair. The greatest violinists were always Jews. Nowadays, it's not the case anymore.
Oh, but why is this?
This is a riddle to me. I don't know. After all, Japan, China, and Korea, they were not acquainted with European music for such a long time to have really established a definite feeling for it. They have really adapted it and made progress in no time.
It must be, presumably, it must be the teaching at the elementary and secondary levels.
That is true. I mean, in that connection, it sounds a bit funny if I say this, but in Korea, there's a former student of mine, a Korean woman, who was teaching the lot of them to start with. They came then to America, they came to me, they came to Flesch, they came to different.
Now, about 15 years ago, you started the European String Teachers Association, or you
ESTA.
associated. Yeah.
That's it.
And this was an association with Menuhin and Siegfried Palm and Schneiderhahn and people like that.
Well, they were not at the beginning. You see, we started only in one country with about 7 members, and now we have 15 European countries belonging to ESTA and having about 3,500 members, which proves that there was a necessity for this. Now, I was president for it from the beginning for 10 years, and I didn't want to go on forever, so Yehudi took over, and he is now the president.
Now, the purpose, presumably, was because there was a shortage of really good teachers at the
Yes.
highest level.
Not only highest level, even to the contrary. We were appealing to the elementary teacher who had no opportunity, sometimes in a village perhaps. They didn't have much knowledge. So they had the opportunity to meet great violinists and great teachers and discuss their troubles. And it was appealing to them, and we considered elementary teaching as of the utmost importance, and it really has worked.
And yet the standard of string playing generally has risen enormously.
Enormously.
Recently. I mean, this must mean that elementary and secondary teachers
You
are
see.
good nowadays.
Much better. And that was the purpose of the creation of ESTA. Actually, the idea was not ours, because America has had it before. Their association is called ASTA, American String Teachers Association. There is also a JASTA, Japanese, an AUSTA, Australian. So there's very many.
But what about the Suzuki method of teaching the violin, which has had very good effects in some cases? Do you approve of it?
I certainly approve of this, only in my experience, this is an excellent affair for the first 2 years. If they go on, they should perhaps change their teacher.
This means changing teacher about the age of 6 or 7, does it?
Not necessarily, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I mean, they start sometimes early, sometimes a bit later. But the first 2 years, I think it's an excellent influence.
Now, I've been reading with great interest your book on Beethoven violin sonatas, the playing of Beethoven violin sonatas. And you say some very interesting things there. You insist, for example, that violinists, fiddle players, should always consult either the original manuscript or first editions, whatever they intend to play, or
Yes.
whatever they intend to play.
Yes.
Are no modern editions to be trusted? Of the classics, certainly.
Well, you see, we very much believe in our time, thank God, that manuscripts or first editions are available. And so the attitude is not to put ourselves in front, but to serve a work in a way. And therefore we have to know what the actual meaning is, the actual writing is, and therefore, of course, you must treat a so-called urtext critically as well. You can't just take it like this. But nowadays, there's a new development, and to my great surprise, I don't understand what's going on, because nowadays, someone who uses an urtext and tries to play what the composer has written, then he is criticized for being unimaginative. He sticks to the urtext. It's a new fashion, which I don't understand. Because, you know, if we all would really follow what is written actually, and it has been written for a certain purpose and it can't be ignored therefore, if we all did that, every one of us would sound completely differently, just as well. But there are some great violinists nowadays also, even nowadays, who would play the right notes and ignore the dynamics of the composer. Why did the composer endeavor to put down with great detail all details of dynamics, also of agogics as well? Well, if you don't take any notice of this, that if you think that you are actually very much cleverer than the composer is.
Sometimes, of course, in classical music, the dynamics seem to be unmusical at the beginning of pieces where you have contrasts between loud and soft, deliberately to set up a kind of curious, ambiguous situation.
Well,
it
yes.
seems to be unmusical.
No, that's not unmusical.
But of course the composer is deliberately doing it.
That is the character. That's the character as we know about Beethoven. Nobody ever has used the idea of piano subito to such an extent as Beethoven did, which I wouldn't say this is unmusical, this is even bizarre sometimes, grotesque, but it is him. For instance, if you have read my book on this, I have done actually an edition also in Germany based on the urtext with my suggestions. If you have read this, then you know how many weeks Beethoven took after finishing a composition to put in these dynamic markings. And there's even a place here referring to a letter that was written to a man called Friedrich Sebastian Mayer on the 8th of April 1806. Beethoven writes, all the pianissimos and crescendos, all the decrescendos and all fortes and fortissimo have been scratched out of my opera. In any case, they are not all observed. All desire to compose anything more ceases completely if I have to hear my works performed like that.
Yes.
So,
well understand it.
Now you understand why dynamics are really of the utmost importance, particularly with Beethoven. With Mozart it becomes rather complicated concerning the violin music. He played his concertos himself, so very often he didn't write anything about dynamics because it was him. He was very clearly marking the orchestral part because he couldn't expect 10 violins, each one doing their own stuff. So it was very generally put down, you do this and you do this. While the soloist, well, he was mainly the soloist, he did not bother about this. And that, of course, can be a very great puzzle. What is the right dynamics that you can apply?
Yes, referring to this, of course, at the end of your book, you include a chapter by Paul Roland on performing practice in the classical and early romantic times. How much should modern players take this into account when they're playing?
Not enough. Not enough. I have, you see, the greatest admiration for the achievement of some very, very fine, great violinists of our day. Some violinists of the past, like Kreisler and Szigeti and Adolf Busch and Enescu, they were not as perfect as the young violinists are nowadays. But there was a certain humanity behind it. And even if there was the slightest mistake, you found, well, he is not a machine. You find it with the nice, great violinist, you know, my violin is a Guarnerius del Gesu, or, you know, Stradivari. You see they were striving for perfection. But you see here and there, yes, we're skidding a little bit, and I think it's so wonderful to see this, that they were human. It's not machine-made. So that when I hear many concerts, I wouldn't say all, but if I hear many concerts nowadays, I have great admiration. I haven't had a great experience.
Just after the war, you recorded all the Beethoven violin sonatas, I think,
Yes.
with Franz Osborne.
No, during the
was it?
war.
During the war, was it?
It was during the war. And they will come out again on CDs
Oh,
now,
will they?
the old recordings.
In the light of all the research that's gone into performing practice in the classical times,
Yes.
would you change what you did then, now?
Possibly, yes, maybe.
I look forward to those CDs enormously, Max Rostal.
Well, then there are later recordings of EMI, which come out in a couple of months now on CDs. That is the entire Schubert works for violin and piano. And especially my performance of the Bartok Violin Concerto, which
Of
I
course.
recorded with the London Symphony Orchestra and Sir Malcolm Sargent.
That was the first performance in this country, wasn't it?
No, I think that Menuhin did the first performance, I did the second.
Ah, I see. Max Rostal, thank you.